Okay, all right. So it has started recording. I hope I am audible. And so let's continue. So last class, what did we do? We did some basic topology. And what was the motivation for doing that?
Ries representation theorem.
Yeah. So we wanted to start discussing the Ries representation theorem. And as I told you, we will follow Rudin, and it's a very important theorem. Many things will be see consequences of this result, and the proof is a bit long. We will state the result today, and we will discuss a little bit about it. But the main parts of the proof we will start in the next class. Okay, and maybe next two classes will be required. Let's see. So let me start sharing the screen. And as usual, one of you please confirm that you can see.
Yes, sir.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So this is Ries representation theorem, RRT. And last time we discussed a few topological preliminaries. What was the main word that you remember from last class? Just one word, you tell me. What is most important? Yeah, Urison. And as a corollary to Urison, we did something else also. What was the word there? Partition of unity. So these two are very important things, and all these we did in general for locally compact Hausdorff spaces, right? And that's where we will state Ries representation theorem also. And today we will start discussing this. So tell me one thing: if you are on a topological space, and this is measure theory, we are discussing measures, measurable sets, measure, etc. What is the most natural sigma algebra on a topological space? What is the word?
Sigma is algebra generated by all open sets.
Yeah, what is it called?
Borel.
Borel. Yeah. So we are, yeah, correct. So in RRT also the word Borel will come. We will construct a sigma algebra which will contain the Borel sigma algebra. Okay. Basically, yeah. So that will come. We are on a topological space, and here is a statement. So many people call this Frederick Ries. As I told you, right, there is Ries representation theorem in Hilbert spaces, which is much easier, and this Ries representation theorem, and both this is due to the same Ries, uh, either Frederick Ries or Fritz Ries, or maybe this is the correct spelling. I don't know how to pronounce it. I think Friedrich Ries. Okay, and there's one more Ries. You know about the other Ries? His brother. You know his first name? Someone knows? There is also M Rees. This is F Rees and there's Marcel Rees. I think he is the elder brother. I forget. Okay. Anyway, here is the statement. So we are on a locally compact Hausdorff space. And what is given to you? So you know CCX. What is CCX?
Continuous function based compact support.
Continuous functions of compact support. And that's a vector space, no?
Yes.
We checked that last time, or I asked you to check that last time. And so continuous functions of compact support, we are taking complex valued functions, unless otherwise specified. Functions are complex valued, and therefore CCX is a complex vector space. And over a complex vector space, what is given to you is a linear functional. So it is complex valued. Okay. But here is the word positive. Can you guess? So it's a complex valued linear functional. Uh, it may not be such a standard term. I don't know. Positive. What is the meaning of positive here?
It's a homogeneity property. It's for positive.
Yeah, so so let's clarify what this means. What is meant is, suppose f takes values in 0 to infinity. It's a complex valued functional, complex valued functions are, that's what we are considering. But suppose f is real valued, not only that, f is non-negative real valued. Okay, then lambda f also should be non-negative real valued. So it's an extra condition on your linear functional. You call it positive if on a positive function the value is also positive. This is the definition. Okay. So lambda can take complex values, but if f is non-negative real valued, then lambda f is also non-negative real valued. These are the conditions given. And corresponding to this, we are going to construct a measure, right? How do you get nice linear functionals on function spaces? From our first chapter, if you have CCX, and if you have a measure mu on x, then there is a natural linear functional, no, associated to mu. What is that functional?
Integration of f.
Integration of f. So this is the converse. We are going to say that these are all, this is the only way you are getting natural linear, this is the only way you are getting linear functionals. That is Riesz representation theorem. So what is given to you is a linear functional, and what is going to be the claim? Claim is that this is given by integration with respect to a measure, and we have to construct that measure, and this measure will satisfy a certain number of nice properties, and a measure satisfying all these properties is also unique. So a linear functional is determined by a measure. Measure of course gives linear functionals, that's obvious. Converse is also true in a unique way. This is the result. Okay. So there exists first of all a sigma algebra in X, and this sigma algebra is a nice sigma algebra because after all there is a natural Borel sigma algebra, and this sigma algebra will contain the Borel sigma algebra. So on any Borel set the measure will make sense, and a positive measure. So a positive measure is valued in 0 to infinity including infinity. Okay. So given a positive linear functional, we are going to construct a sigma algebra which will contain the Borel sigma algebra and a measure on M which is a positive measure. And what should be the next line? Can you tell me? Lambda f equal to, there exists a measure mu such that, what should be the next line? Lambda f equal to
Integration of f d mu.
f d mu over integral is over
x.
over x. Okay, and this is true for all f in CCX. Okay, so because it is given on CCX, so lambda f is integral f d mu over CCX, and moreover this measure will satisfy many natural properties. So let's recall. Okay, this is the most important part, and now there are 4 more statements. So let's go through that. This slide is completely clear. This is one of the most important theorems of this course. Okay, so given a locally compact Hausdorff space and a positive linear functional is given by a measure which has many nice properties. First of all, a compact set will have finite measure. Okay, after all, you know, measure can take infinite value, but a compact set will have a finite measure. That's first property. Second property is, if you have any measurable set, in fact, we are going to show this for any set E. Okay, any set E, mu of E is given by, you take open sets, and mu of V makes sense because your sigma algebra finally is going to contain the Borel sigma algebra, in particular all open sets. So you take open sets containing your set, take its measure, and because it's a measure, you assume that if A is contained in B, mu A should be less than mu B. So if something is containing mu V should be bigger, take the infimum, and that should be mu E. Okay, and this is true for every measurable E. Okay, what is the word here? What this reminds you of what word that you know from MSc measure theory?
Outer measure.
Outer regular. So you say that if E has this property, then you say that E is outer regular, and if so E is outer regular and mu is outer regular because for all measurable sets are outer regular. Therefore, you say that the measure is outer regular. Okay, so it can be approximated from above via open sets. And what should be the next condition? If outer regular is there, then what could be the most natural next condition?
Inner
Regular. So outer regulars via open sets containing the set. Inner regulars via
Closed set contained in
closed or Think of Urysohn lemma, etc. On the one side, you had open set containing compact. Okay. So inner regular is via compact sets contained inside. So instead of supremum, what should you take? Instead of infimum, what should you take? Supremum, because you are going from inside. So you are increasing. So you have to take the supremum. But the Riesz representation theorem guarantees an outer regular measure, but it does not guarantee an inner regular measure. Okay. So keep this in mind. In general, Riesz representation theorem does not guarantee an inner regular measure. So what is true is this. Inner regular condition is this. Mu E is supremum of mu K, K contained in E, K compact. This is true under some conditions on E. So this is true if E is an open set. And this is true if E has finite measure. Okay. So we are not claiming. So what is the difference between this and the previous? Yeah.
Sir, in the first definition, in FIMAP definition, we are taking B as open set, and in second definition, we are taking K as a compact set. Why,
Yes.
sir?
That is how it is. Inner regular and outer regular. From outside, this is what is there for us. Okay. So from outside, you take open sets, and from inside you take compact sets. This is what we can do because this is how Urysohn kind of situation, topological things that we have done. This is how it is set up. You remember Urysohn's lemma? You have K contained in V is the situation. K compact and V open. Okay.
Yes.
So
this is coming from Urysohn's.
Urysohn is in the background. We will see when we see the proof. It is many times we will appeal to Urysohn and partition of unity and such kind of notions. Okay. So that's how it is constructed. But the point here to remember is the measure is not inner regular. When will you say the measure is inner regular? If mu of E is sup of mu K, this is true for all measurable sets. But I'm not claiming it for all measurable sets. I'm claiming it only for open sets and of sets of finite measure. In other words, open sets and sets of finite measure are inner regular. Why am I not calling mu to be inner regular? Because I'm not claiming this for all measurable sets. Here I claimed it for every E in M. Here I am not claiming it for every E in M. So this is a property. Later we will see under one more condition, we will get regular measures. So what is a regular measure? It is both outer regular and inner regular. So we will see that soon after RRT. Okay. And the last thing is mu is complete. So what is complete? If you have a set of measures 0, then any subset is
accepted in the sigma algebra.
Measurable.
Yeah, but the main important point is any subset should be measurable, and then automatically the measure is 0. Okay, so mu is also complete. So moreover, the positive measure mu representing lambda with all these properties, it is unique. There is exactly one measure which represents
lambda. Why this is mu is complete, sir? Any measure will be complete.
Say that again.
Sir, why this is particular for mu? Because every measure is complete.
Every measure is not complete. There are non-complete measures. See, the point is, if you have a set of measures 0, so let us say B is measure 0 and A is contained in B. If A is measurable, if A belongs to the sigma algebra, then it is clear mu A is less than or equal to mu B is 0, so mu A is 0. Yes. But it's possible that you may have a set of measures 0 and a subset may be non-measurable, no?
Yes.
Right? And then you cannot say its measure is 0. No, if it is not measurable, then how can you measure?
Yes, sir. Then what is definition of here mu complete?
Complete meaning mu is complete if every set of measures 0, for any set of measures 0, any subset is measurable.
Oh, yes.
So mu is complete actually means x comma m comma mu is complete.
Yes.
This is our shorthand for that. Okay. Fine. And naturally non-complete measures will come when we take product measures. If x is a measure space and y is a measure space, and x cross y there is a natural product measure, and that is typically not complete. Okay. And in some sense, Riemann integration is not complete and Lebesgue measure is complete. Okay. So there are non-complete things. Yeah. So, but my next point is the mu coming in RRT is unique. Okay. So let us prove uniqueness. Okay, that we can do easily. So because mu is outer regular, so in order to, so what do you have to show to say that mu is unique? Suppose there are two measures satisfying all these properties, you have to show that mu1 equal to mu2, right? But what is
Yes.
the meaning of mu1 equal to mu2? Mu1 equal to mu2 on any measurable set, no? Mu1 equal to mu2 meaning mu1 of E
Yes.
equal to
Yes.
mu2 of E for every E in M, right? But
Yes.
because of this condition, isn't it enough if I show it for all open sets? Mu1V equal to mu2V for all open sets. That's enough, no?
Yes, sir. Because then mu is
Yeah.
unique also.
Yes. Okay. So I have to show that mu1V equal to mu2V for all open sets. But because of this condition, which is true for all open sets, is it enough to show that mu1k is mu2k for all compact sets? Agree? If I show that mu1k equal to mu2k for any compact sets, then they will be equal for any open set by this condition, no? By taking supremum. Yeah?
Sir, but mu is not inner image.
Say that
Inner
again.
regular. But sir, mu is not inner regular.
No, E is open. Then open sets are inner regular. Mu
And
measure may not be inner regular. Measure is inner regular if every measurable set is inner regular.
yes.
But we know that open sets are inner regular.
Yes.
So we concluded that it's enough to show that mu1v equal to mu2v for all open sets. But now if you take an
Yes.
open set, then that can be approximated by compact sets from below.
Yes. Yes.
And therefore, if you show that mu1k equal to mu2k for every compact set, then it is true for open sets and then it is true for any measurable set.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so we have to show it only for compact sets. So this is the first claim, mu is determined by its values on compact sets. Okay. Now suppose mu1 and mu2 are measures which satisfy all these properties. We have to show that mu1k equal to mu2k, whatever k you give me, compact. Agree? Okay, so it's a nice proof. So let k be any compact set. What do we have to show? We have to show mu1k equal to
mu2k.
mu2k. Now how do you show a equal to b? What is the meaning of a equal to b? Well, these are numbers. Mu1k will be
A
a
less
number.
than B.
A less than or
Less
equal
than.
to b and b less than or equal to a. But if I show mu1k is less than or equal to mu2k, then I am done, no?
Yes, sir. Because reverse.
Because I
Reverse
can
is also.
interchange mu2 and mu1 and repeat the same argument. Correct? Okay,
Yes,
so
sir.
that's what we will do. One of them is less than or equal to the other is all that we have to do. And then we can repeat by interchanging mu1 and mu2. So let k be compact. And what is mu2k? Mu2k from the inner regularity, if E is an open set, then it is the supremum of mu k, right? So mu2 of E is supremum of mu2k.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes. So, and what is supremum? Supremum is the lowest upper bound, no, least upper bound, right?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So if so mu2k you should take and you take the supremum, and that's what mu of an open set is. So mu2k is, this is wrong. Mu2k is, no, what I have written is not correct. What I should write here is,
It's smallest upper bounds.
it is the least upper bound. Okay, so read this as the least upper bound, and no, all this is wrong.
Sir, here you take
No,
K is
sir.
compact.
Yeah, this is also okay. I am saying
Yeah.
that
Okay.
I'm
It
applying
is
this one. I'm applying this one.
outer regularity.
Outer regular. Okay. So I can put here anything and I'm putting K here. and it is the greatest lower bound of mu v containing E. Okay. So therefore, it is the greatest lower bound. So anything greater will not be a lower bound, right? Mu2k is the greatest lower bound. So if you take something bigger than mu2k, it will not be a lower bound for mu2v, no? Since it's the greatest lower
Yes,
bound
sir. Yes.
mu2 over open V containing k, if you take any epsilon positive and if you take mu2k plus epsilon, that's not a lower bound, right?
Yes.
Yes.
What does that mean? Take an epsilon. This is also because mu2k is finite. Because if it was infinite, infinite plus epsilon is also infinite. So you could not have argued like that. This argument is fine because you know that mu2k is finite. You agree? Because only for a finite
Yes.
number
Yes.
plus epsilon is strictly bigger, no?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Mu2k
and
is
but this is
finite
also
by
given
the
to you.
second condition. That
Say it again.
compact set has a finite measure.
Yes, that is given to you. That is one of the properties.
Yes.
We are saying that uniqueness is there, assuming all these properties. Okay, so indeed we know this. Therefore, this argument is okay. So fix an epsilon, and mu2k plus epsilon is not a lower bound for all mu2v. What does that mean? There is at least one v such that mu2v is, there is v containing k such that mu2v is strictly less than mu2k plus epsilon. Agree?
Yes.
So k is fixed, epsilon is fixed, and you have got a v containing k such that this happens. Okay. Now this is this is what is given to you. Now you know you have naturally k contained in v. But k contained in v, what are you reminded of if you have k contained in v? This reminds you of which result from last class?
There is
There
Hmm?
is a
some set.
continuous function.
Say it again.
There is a continuous function f.
Yeah, you can just tell me the name. You don't have to repeat the result.
Urysohn's lemma.
Urysohn's lemma. And therefore, you have a continuous function with certain properties, compact support and taking values between 0 and 1, such that k precedes f, meaning f is identically 1 on k and support of f is contained in v, right? All this you know. So this reminds you of Urysohn. So apply Urysohn and you got an f, such that this notation is true, right? K precedes f. Agree?
Yeah.
Can you guess what my next step is? So in terms of characteristic functions, what does this mean? K precedes f precedes v. In terms of characteristic functions, what does this mean?
Characteristic function of k less than or equal to f less than or equal to.
Correct? Yeah. Therefore now I can take one of the measures. I am taking mu1k. But what is mu1k? Mu1k in terms of integral is integral over x of
Yes.
integral over x of integral over x of this mu with characteristic function of k d mu1. Agree?
Correct.
Just mu1 will be mu1 of x. No, so I have to put characteristic function. Okay, but chi k is less than or equal to f. No,
Yes.
Yes.
so this is less than or equal to integral f d mu1 over x. You agree?
Yes, sir.
What is the next step? This is less than or equal to integral
Chi v.
chi p d mu1, but this is lambda f. Remember this, and this is same as f d mu2, right? Because you are saying that mu1 and mu2 both satisfy RRT conditions, right? So lambda f is integral f d mu1 on the one hand. On the other hand, it is also integral f d mu2. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Now this is less than or equal to integral chi v d mu2 because f is less than or equal to chi v, right? But this is mu2 of v. But what was the condition on mu2 of v? This is strictly less than mu2 of k plus epsilon. So what you have concluded is if there are two measures satisfying all these conditions, then mu1 of k is less than mu2 k plus epsilon, but you can vary the epsilon. This is true for any epsilon. Therefore, what is the conclusion? Mu1k is less than or equal to mu2k.
mu2k, yes.
Yeah.
But that means mu1k equal to mu2k, because the opposite you could have started with mu2 and you could have proved it the other way, right? You could have done greatest lower bound, all those you could have applied for mu1. You could have got v and k such that mu1 v. All these arguments you repeat with mu1 instead of mu2 and mu2 instead of mu1. So you get the other inequality. Therefore, this is true.
Sir, please repeat once, sir, again. From now,
Which
sir.
step? Which step?
From now, mu1k equal to integration fk, and this is less than integration f d mu.
This is okay?
No, sir. From now.
From now, okay.
Yes.
Mu1k, let us analyze. Mu1k is same as integral of chi k d mu1.
Yes.
This is less than or equal to integral f d mu1 because chi k is less than or equal to f.
Yes.
And this is same as lambda f, no? Because what is mu1?
By
Mu1 is
definition.
the
By
measure.
definition.
This is a not definition. It is a conclusion of RRT.
Oh, yes.
Right. There exists a measure such that integral f d mu is lambda f, and we are saying mu1 is such a measure. But we are also saying mu2 is also such a measure. Therefore, lambda
Yes.
f is equal to integral f d mu2.
Yes.
See, what we are going to show is if mu1 and mu2 satisfy all those conditions, we want to show mu1 equal to mu2. But both mu1 and mu2 satisfy all those conditions. In particular,
Yes.
lambda f is integral f d mu1. Lambda f is also integral f d mu2.
Yes, sir.
But f is less than or equal to chi v.
Yes, sir.
And this is same as mu2 of v, right?
Yes, sir. This is less than
But
mu2k.
we have chosen v containing k such that mu2 of v is less than mu2k plus epsilon.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And if right?
Currently, any number,
And
so
this is
mu1k
true.
is less
This
than
is
mu2k.
true. This is true for any epsilon. Well,
Yes, sir.
okay. So
Understood.
if you vary epsilon, what will happen? If you take another epsilon, you may get another v
Yes, sir.
containing k. Okay, but finally, that doesn't matter. Only mu1k and mu2k plus epsilon is there. So for any epsilon, this is true. The v may change.
Yes, sir.
This v will depend on, so here fix epsilon and you get a v. When you change epsilon, there may be another v, but that doesn't matter. Here finally that v may change, but that is less than mu2k plus epsilon. So this is true. Mu1k is less than mu2k plus epsilon is true for any epsilon positive. That means this, no?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah? Mu1k is less than mu2k plus half, mu1k is less than
Yes, sir.
mu2k
Yes, sir. And
plus 1/3,
similarly,
etc.
vice
So that
versa.
means this, yeah?
Yes, sir.
But you can reverse the argument with mu2 instead of mu1 and mu1 instead of mu2.
Yes, sir.
Therefore, you get mu2k less than or equal to mu1k.
Hence equality. Okay.
That means mu1k equal to mu2k for all k. Whichever k you start with, you can do this argument.
Yes, sir.
So uniqueness is a consequence basically of Urysohn's lemma. So what we have proved is, if we can show the existence of such a measure, uniqueness we have proved. So what remains? Given x and given lambda, we have to show the existence of a sigma algebra and a measure such that all those properties are satisfied. That is the real difficult thing, which we may take next 2 classes. So let me give some basic definitions. I mean, how to construct, I will say, then it satisfies all those properties. We will take some time to prove. So construction of mu and m. Now, suppose f precedes v. Okay, what does that mean? F is in CCX, taking values between 0 and 1, and support of f is
supporting b.
Yeah, support of f is contained in v. Okay, if that is true, then what is in lambda f? Lambda f is, suppose lambda f is integral f d mu. There's a typo here, f d mu, and but what will be integral f d mu? That is less than or equal to integral chi v d mu, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
that is mu of v, right? So lambda f will be less than mu of v if f precedes v. You agree? if all the conditions of RRT are finally true, then if f precedes v, lambda f will be less than mu v. Right? Lambda is given to you. Lambda is given to you, and we have to define mu. Right? We have to define mu on what? You have to somehow get a collection of sets, which should be a sigma algebra, and we have to define mu for each of those sets. Right? But RRT, we know the collection, the sigma algebra contains all the Borel sets. Finally. Yes? And in particular, it contains all the open sets. So if I am going to define a mu, first of all, I should have a good definition of mu for open sets. Only then I can, try to define more generally. Open sets are always there, no? And our sigma algebra finally is going to contain all the open sets. Okay.
Yes, sir.
See, what I'm trying to do in this slide is to motivate a definition of mu of v when v is open. I have to define mu. What is given to me is lambda. This is given to me, lambda. I have to define mu. But if everything was nice and if there was such a mu, then this property will be true that lambda f is less than or equal to mu v. So what can be a good definition of mu on an open set in terms of lambda? From this inequality, reverse engineering, go back and define mu v for me. If you define mu v, it has to be bigger than lambda f. For these f's, whenever f precedes v. So what is a good definition of mu v?
Lambda f.
Yeah, you take all the lambda f. And where f varies with what condition? All f preceding v. V is given to you, right? You have to define mu v. So you take all those f which precedes v, and for all those f you take lambda f, and then what will you do for that collection?
Supremum.
Take supremum or infimum, because lambda f is below mu v if everything was correct. So you have to increase it, right? So you take supremum, right? So what is given to us is lambda, and we have to define mu, and of course m, which we are going to come to. But finally our M contains Borel sets and all open sets, so it's natural to see whether we have a good definition of mu on an open set V. And once we define mu, we are forced to have lambda f. This is what I discussed verbally. Lambda f less than or equal to mu v. So we define mu v as sup of lambda f. So in terms of what is given, this is a definition, right? This is a good candidate. Finally, we don't know whether this mu is a measure or not. No, we have to show countable additivity, right? Only then it's a measure. But that is later.
Yes.
At least, intuitively, you are getting a good definition. You are getting a good number attributed to lambda f. And you hope to get countable additivity because suppose it is additive. Forget countable. Mu of v1 union v2, if v1 and v2 are disjoint, as mu of v1 plus v2, you will hope to get that because what is a key property on the right hand side which you will think, therefore this is true. Forget the proof, rigorous proof will come later, but intuitively you expect it to be true because you may be wrong, but what is your first idea? Mu of v1 union v2 is mu of v1 plus mu of v2. You expect that this may be true. It may be wrong, but you have a feeling that it may be true because of what property on the right hand side in this definition? Because lambda also is additive, no? Right? Lambda also has lambda is a linear functional, right? So there's some kind of additivity for lambda. Lambda of f plus g is lambda f plus lambda g.
Yes, sir.
I'm not making a mathematically rigorous statement. I'm just saying, there is some kind of additivity on the right hand side, and therefore, hopefully there will be some kind of additivity on the left hand side. Proof we are going to come only in the next class anyway. Okay, so this is a good definition for open sets. And finally, you have to define for open sets because finally you know that the sigma algebra that you construct will contain all open sets. Okay, let's continue. Make the first observation. Suppose you have two open sets v1 and v2 and one is contained in the other. you have got a definition of mu of V1 and you have got a definition of mu of V2. Right? You have already defined mu of V1, mu of V2. Is it true that mu of V1 is less than or equal to mu V2? Is it obvious? What happens if V1 is contained in V2 and if F precedes V1, what can you conclude about F and V2? If F precedes V1, then it also precedes V2. So if you take supremum over this collection and supremum over that collection, which collection is bigger? Collection with respect to V1 or collection with respect to V2? Suppose if F is contained in
With respect to
V1.
V2.
Yeah, with respect to V2. So if you take supremum over a bigger set, then that is bigger, no?
Yes.
Yes. Therefore, mu V1 is less than or equal to mu V2. Clear? So this looks
Yes.
good. The definition mu has all the nice properties. Okay, this is clear. Because of this, in particular, if you take an open set E, you agree this is true? You can take open sets containing that, but E is also open. E is also open, V is also open. Therefore, what did we just conclude in the previous slide? Mu of E is less than or equal to mu of V, right?
Yes.
And because of that, in this collection on the right hand side, mu V E contained in V, V open, mu of E itself is there, no? Because E is contained in E, right? Anyway, this collection has mu of E, and mu of E has to be the infimum, right? Because E is contained in all those V. Therefore, mu of E is less than or equal to mu V. Therefore, the infimum is mu of E only, right? Agree, infimum is attained, no? Infimum is same as minimum here, no? Do you agree or you have a problem with this statement? See here, E is not an arbitrary set. E is also an open set. So out of this V, one of the V is E itself. Because E is contained in E, right?
Yeah.
Subset meaning subset and equal to. That is the meaning of subset. Okay, we will not always put this equal to sign here. So E is also here, no, in this collection.
Yes, sir.
Because
Yes,
E is
yes.
open. Okay, therefore mu of E is there in this collection. But
Yes.
any other V strictly bigger than E, mu of E will be bigger than or equal to mu of E. So the infimum is mu of E, right?
Yeah.
So this is true. For any open set, this identity is true. And therefore, it's a good definition for mu of E for any E. Because where you have defined it matches, it coincides. That's how you advance a definition, right? In mathematics or anywhere. Something you reach and on that you build the next step. But when you build the next step, it should be compatible with what you have observed already, right? So you
Yes,
have a
sir.
definition of mu for an open set, and that definition matches with this identity, and this identity now makes sense for any open set, any set, and therefore you take this as the definition of mu on an arbitrary set. You're okay with this logic? After all, I'm defining something, so you cannot object. You cannot say, how can you define? I mean, I am defining, or Rodin has defined, or someone else has defined. Okay, fine. But now
Yes.
you can ask, so if I am defining this mu on any arbitrary, whatever subset you give, I am defining a notion of mu of E. Then you have a natural question, right? Then why can't my sigma algebra be the power set? All subsets I can take, right? Because mu of E makes sense.
Yes.
But is that
Yes.
correct? And the proof is almost over. But is that what can go wrong?
We need mu to be countably additive.
Yeah, so we need to prove that, and somehow we will not be able to prove it on the full power set. So we will have to restrict the power set to a sub collection. Okay, so we don't take M to be the power set. The point is that we can prove countable additivity of mu only on a sub collection, which we will show is also a sigma algebra. Okay, on a certain sub collection, we will show countable additivity, but this is a definition. My definition is true. Getting a number out of a set, for every set I am going to assign a complex, assign a positive number, non-negative number. It could be infinity also, a number in 0 to infinity. Okay, this much I am going to do for all sets. And on all sets, I have monotonicity. Do you agree monotonicity is there? If E1 is contained in E2, then mu of E1 is less than or equal to mu of E2. That is true, no, with this definition? If E1 is contained in E2, and if V contains E2, then V contains E1, right? So,
Yes.
so if E1 is contained in E2, then for mu of E1, I'm taking all V containing E1, but E1 is contained in E2. So if V contains E2, then V contains E1. So for E1, there is a collection. For E2, there is a collection. Which is bigger? Which is bigger collection?
For
Collection
E1.
for E1 or collection for E2?
For E1.
Collection for E2.
Collection for E1 is bigger, no?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Because if V contains E2, then of course V contains E1. So if V is there in the collection for E2, then V is there in the collection for E1. So collection for E1 is bigger.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Yeah.
Right.
And because you are taking infimum of a bigger set is smaller, no?
Yes, sir.
So mu of E1 is smaller because the collection is bigger for E1. Okay, so monotonicity is also true. So we have succeeded in assigning a good number to any set, any subset of X, such that monotonicity is true. That much is not a problem. Only problem is showing countable additivity. Okay, so we will restrict. So this is also true, and this is also consistent with See, lambda also has monotonicity. So we have proved for any subset monotonicity just now, and lambda also has monotonicity. What does that mean? If f is less than or equal to g. So when you say f is less than or equal to g, it is understood that f takes real values, g takes real values. Okay, only then
Yes,
this
sir.
notation
Yes.
we use. This is Rodin's convention. He will not say again f is real valued. It's understood. Then lambda f is less than or equal to lambda g. Why is that? What is the key word which gives you this inequality? Why is this true? There is a word on lambda, no? Lambda is a linear
function.
Which is
Linear
also
positive. Linear
positive.
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 Yeah, positive. Because of that, because lambda g you can write as lambda f plus lambda g minus lambda f. Lambda g minus lambda f is lambda of g minus f. But lambda of g minus f is positive because g minus f is positive.
Correct.
Okay, so lambda also has a monotonicity and mu also has a monotonicity. This is, all going parallel. All the nice things are happening. Okay, so we have defined this. Now we have to, so we have built outer regularity into our, we have built the outer regularity or built outer regularity. I think there's no need of the here. Up to now, we have built outer regularity into our definition of mu. I will delete this. You agree? Because my definition of mu, I have enforced outer regularity. So I don't need to prove it, no? Because it's part of my definition. When I prove that mu is a good measure, outer regularity is built into that. So there's nothing to prove. Okay. But if you look at, what we are seeing, once in a while we have to also see what we are planning to prove. Okay. In what we are planning to prove, there is also an inner regularity condition. Mu is not finally going to be inner regular, but there is something like inner regular. Many sets are inner regular. All open sets are inner regular. All sets of finite measure are inner regular. Okay, there's an inner regularity condition, and that also we should make use of. And where are we going to make use of that? We have already defined a candidate mu. Now we have to define a candidate sigma algebra, right? Power set may not work and we have to restrict it. And in order to restrict that collection, we are going to use this inner regularity notion. Okay. So for open and finite measurable sets, therefore we are going to define MF first, but the notation tells you that this is not my final answer, no? Does the notation tell you that this is not the end of it? Just notation.
Yes, sir. Because at the
Why?
end it should become M.
Say that again.
At the end it should become up with M, only M.
Yeah, it should come up with M only. Absolutely. So this MF is like finite. Okay, M for finite. And I'm going to define this to be all those sets, and I'm putting some restrictions on sets. I'm not interested in all the sets because then I won't be able to prove countable additivity. So I'm going to make some restriction. First of all, I am saying that E is finite. Okay. And on finite sets, finally you expect inner regularity to be true, and therefore you put those conditions, put that condition. Finite sets are supposed to be inner regular, right? So all those finite sets where inner regularity is true, you restrict your attention to that collection. And this is the collection that we are interested in. Agree? It's kind of motivated, right? Because finally in RRT you expect inner regularity to be true for all finite measurable sets. You have already defined mu, therefore mu of E makes sense for any set. So you consider that collection where this number mu of E is finite, and for finite sets, because you expect inner regularity, you take only those sets where this condition is met. Okay, but this is MF, and in general you define M to be all those sets E such that E intersection K is in MF for every compact K. This makes sense, no? Why will E intersection K, whether it's in MF or not, the first condition is automatically met. Why is that? This condition is always true for E intersection K. Why is that?
Subset of E.
Because E intersection K is a subset of K and mu is monotone. And mu of K is finally going to be finite. Okay, no, we don't know that yet. We have to prove it. Okay, but so let's leave it like that. I'm not saying this is met because we have not proved mu K is finite. But still the definition makes sense. Take all those sets E such that E intersection K belongs to this collection for every compact K, and this is our final sigma algebra. So we have to prove. It's not obvious at all that this is sigma algebra. We will prove it. Okay, all right. Let us prove completeness. That is easy. If mu of E is 0, then do you agree that E belongs to MF? Suppose mu of E is 0. Mu is assigned to any set has a mu of E, no? Mu we have defined on all sets. And in that definition, suppose mu is 0, then this condition is true, right?
Yes.
And is this condition also true if mu E is 0? Yes, because if K is contained in E and mu is defined for every set and mu is monotone, therefore mu K is also 0. So supremum over 0 is 0. So if a set has mu measure, I call it measure, but up to now we haven't defined, we haven't proved it's a measure. But this number mu of E, if it is 0, then E belongs to MF. Agree?
Yes.
And
Yes.
E belongs to M also, right? Because if E has measure 0, then E intersection K also has measure 0.
Yes.
And anything which measures 0 is in MF. Therefore, E belongs to M also. Okay. Now this shows completeness. Because if mu is complete, we need to show that subsets of sets of measure 0 are measurable. But if you take mu E to be 0, and if you take a subset of E, A contained in E, what do you have to show? You have to show A belongs to M. But mu is defined on all sets. So if A is contained in E, mu A also is defined, and mu is monotone. So mu A is less than or equal to mu E, but mu E is 0. Therefore, mu A is 0. And if mu A is 0, then A belongs to M. We have already shown that. So subsets of sets of measure 0 are measurable. So because of monotonicity, it follows. You agree? Is there any question on this slide?
On completeness, sir, I have a question now.
Say it again.
Sir, completeness, uncompleteness.
Yeah.
How it comes, sir, I don't know.
So what do we have to show? We have to show that if mu of E is 0, we have to show that if mu of E is 0 and if A is contained in E, we have to show that mu of A equal to 0, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Now I am saying that if mu of E is 0 and if A is contained in E, no, we have to show that A belongs to M. That's what we have to show.
Yeah,
A
yes,
is
yes, sir,
measurable.
yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
But if mu of E is 0 and if A is contained in E, then mu of A is less than or equal to mu of E, no? Because mu
So
is
we don't
defined on
know.
all sets. This is the mu that we have defined. It is
Oh, yes, sir,
defined
for
on all
all. It
sets.
is defined for all. Set. Okay,
Yes,
okay, okay.
it is defined for all.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Now it's clear. Okay.
Under that definition, mu of A is 0.
Yes, sir. Yeah, now it's
But
clear.
in this line, we have proved that anything which is 0 belongs to M. Therefore, A belongs to M.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the measure mu, if we construct that M, which we have given a candidate and we have defined mu on all sets, you restrict that mu to M and then it has countable additivity. Mu may not be countably additive on the power set, but on this M that we have defined, mu will be countably additive. That's what we have to show. We will prove it.
Yes.
Okay, so completeness is fine. Now rest of the proof is, it's occupying 5 pages, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 5 or 6. 5, I will say, half of 42 to half of 47. So 43, 44, 45, 46 and half of 47 and half of 42. So 5 pages. So the rest of the proof is full 5 printed pages of Rudin's book, 42 to 47. And it is given in 10 steps, step 1, step 2 up to step 10. Okay, this we will start in the next class, and next class it will not be over, and in the next class also, but we will end today by going through these steps. So it may not be very motivated, but we will just see the steps once, and I will ask you to read and come, so that going through this proof will be easier. Okay, because this is not something that I can finish in one class. It is going to take 1 or 2 classes or maybe more, I don't know. But let us just go through the steps blindly. Don't ask me why this step, why that step. That will be clear
Okay.
only when we go through that. Okay,
Okay.
this is how Rudin has designed the proof. Is there a question?
Still no, sir.
It's a very important theorem and you should all know the proof, one of the proofs, and we are following Rudin, so let us follow Rudin's proof. There may be a better proof somewhere on the internet, I don't know. And I haven't bothered because I like this proof anyway, and all the details are given, and we will go via this. So you will see, something that we are proving, finally something more is true. Okay, so you're proving this for arbitrary EI. So what is the difference between this and countable additivity? In the display, there are 2 differences between countable additivity and what is displayed. What are the 2 differences?
Disjoint set.
Yeah, one is EI should be disjoint and the other is it should be an equality, not an inequality. But as a first step, since mu is defined for arbitrary sets, on arbitrary sets we will show this subadditivity. Okay, disjointness is not required, even then this is true.
Yes.
Okay. And second step is compact sets belongs to your MF, that in between thing. And in particular, this will show that mu of k is finite, right? Because in the definition of MF, first condition was finiteness.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we are achieving, some of the conditions that we require. Mu of k should be finite. We are going to show that at this step itself, and we will more generally show any compact set belongs to MF. And on compact sets, we are going to show that if k precedes f and if you take lambda f and if you take infimum, then that matches with mu k. We will show this extra condition on compact sets. Okay, this is step 2, and in particular mu k is finite is done. In step 3, we are going to show that open sets are inner regular. We need to show this, no? We need to show that open sets are inner regular. We also need to show that finite measure sets are inner regular. In step 3, we will show that open sets are inner regular. And in particular, MF will contain open sets of finite measure. Right? Because what was MF? MF is inner regularity condition together with finiteness. This was the definition of MF. And step 4, we will show that if MF, if you take sets which are pairwise disjoint, then countable additivity is true. So we have to show countable additivity on M, and we are going to show it on MF at this step. Okay. Moreover, if the union itself has finite measure, then E also belongs to MF. So that inner regularity is true for the union also. That also we will show. Okay. So step 4. And step 5 is, this is an important step. If you take anything from that MF and whatever epsilon you give, I will sandwich E between K and V. So you will see that unison kind of thing. So what will be E in terms of K and V? What do you guess? K is always lower, compact is from below, and open is from above. So such that K is contained in
E contained V.
V. And what do you think is the statement about epsilon? You want to say that any set in MF can be nicely approximated by compact from below and open from above. How do you say that in terms of epsilon? Given epsilon, there is K below, V above, such that the difference of V and K, V minus K, is very small. But what is very small in this proof?
Epsilon.
Epsilon. Less than epsilon.
Yeah, but what of V minus K? The only number that we are dealing with is
Mu of-
mu, no? So mu of V minus
Mu.
K is less than epsilon. And this will be useful, right? Because on compact sets, this integral is easy to look at. And for open sets, this integral is easy to look at in terms of characteristic functions, and f is sandwiched between the two. So in order to understand integral f d mu, you will understand integral chi k d mu and integral chi v d mu, and you can approximate using k and v because of this result. Okay. In step 6, you will show if a and b are in MF, then A union B, A intersection B, and A minus B, all these things are in MF. So MF has some nice properties. And in step 7, you are going to show that M itself is a sigma algebra. Finally, we have to show that, right? Our construction of F, and that is step 7. M is a sigma algebra, and M contains D. That also we will show. All open sets are there. And step 8, you will show, you will give another characterization of MF in terms of M. See, we built M in terms of MF, and then we will go back and give a characterization of MF in terms of M, which is that MF consists precisely of those sets of M with finite measure. And all this interconnection will play a role, and we will show that mu is a measure on M. So what is there to show? If you have a disjoint, pairwise disjoint sets in M, then it's countably additive. Mu of union EI is summation mu of EI. And what is the last step? I said there are 10 steps. We have finished 9. Can you tell me the 10th step?
Lambda f equal to integration EM du.
Yes. Last step is the most important step. For every f in CCX, lambda f is integral f du. Okay. So familiarize yourself with the proof by reading it. And it's an important proof, and it will be good if you know the proof by heart. Okay. So here are all the steps, and we will start doing this from the next class. Is that okay? So we are finishing earlier than usual. That's okay. So let me. I will stop sharing the screen, and I will also stop recording.